10 years. A whole decade. That's how long I'd been married to Brittany when I clicked "Confirm Booking" on the cruise site. It was supposed to be special, Caribbean sunsets, endless drinks, the works. I'd gone all in. Balcony suite, champagne on arrival, prepaid couples massages. The whole thing was my way of saying, we made it. Through layoffs, 2 miscarriages, her mother's cancer, my burnout phase, we'd clawed our way through it all, together. Or so I thought. I remember the day I told her about the cruise. I came home early, clutching the glossy brochure like a kid with a golden ticket. Brittany was on the couch, thumbing through her phone, barely looked up. When I showed her the itinerary, her reaction was, off. No wide-eyed grin. No jumping into my arms. Just a small nod and something like a forced smile. Said it sounded nice. That was it. I chalked it up to stress. Real estate had been rough that quarter, and she'd been juggling a new listing. But even then, something about the way she didn't ask a single question stuck with me. Not even a "what's the ship called" or "which islands are we hitting?" Nothing. It was like I told her we'd be spending the weekend cleaning the garage. The weeks leading up to the cruise passed in a blur. I was neck-deep in end-of-quarter reports, pulling 10-hour days at the agency. Still, I found time to sneak little beachwear items into her closet, flowy dresses, a pair of sandals she'd admired in passing, a woven sun hat with a playful brim. Little surprises, thoughtful details. That's always been my thing. 3 days before we were set to sail, she started acting distant. Colder than usual. Phone always face down, lots of late-night calls with clients, and one evening she casually mentioned needing to stop by Jason's apartment. Jason, her self-declared gay best friend. I never had an issue with the guy, not really. But lately, his name had been coming up a little too often. They'd started running together. Then dinner after. Then drinks. I told myself I was being paranoid. The day before we were supposed to fly out to Miami, she hit me with it. Said something had come up at the office, her boss was out sick, a major closing was hanging in the balance, and she couldn't just abandon ship, so to speak. I stood there like an idiot, suitcase already zipped, boarding passes printed. I asked her if there was any way she could work remotely. She said the Wi-Fi would be unreliable. I asked her if she was sure. She said she didn't want to let her team down. There was no fight. No yelling. She didn't even seem sorry. It was like she was talking about missing a dentist appointment, not the vacation I'd been planning for 4 months. That was the part that hurt. Not the cancellation, things happen, life's messy. It was the complete lack of emotion in her eyes when she told me she wasn't coming. So I went anyway. I couldn't stand the thought of the cabin sitting empty. Couldn't bear to watch the cruise sail away from a hotel TV screen while she caught up on paperwork or whatever she claimed was more important than us. So I boarded that ship alone, carrying both our suitcases like some clueless husband in a Hallmark movie. The first day on board was surreal. I kept glancing at the empty lounger next to mine, imagining her beside me, laughing over frozen daiquiris. Every couple I passed felt like a reminder of what I didn't have. I tried to shake it off. Told myself the salt air would do me good. That maybe this time away would give me clarity. But something wasn't sitting right. It was the timing. The way her work emergency popped up exactly the day before departure. The way she hadn't even tried to move things around. How fast she'd agreed when I said I'd go without her. Most of all, it was the way her phone never seemed to leave her hand the week before, how she'd laugh a little too long at some texts, then go quiet when I walked into the room. There was a moment, standing at the railing the first night, watching the skyline of Miami fade into the horizon, where I felt like something inside me had shifted. Like I'd been looking at my life through a fogged-up window for years, and now the glass was starting to clear. I wasn't the jealous type. Never had been. I gave her space, trusted her judgment, believed in our foundation. But out there, with nothing but ocean and strangers around me, I started replaying every small weird moment from the past few months. The girls' nights that ended past midnight. The locked phone. The sudden change in her body language when I entered a room. That weird charge in the air when she'd get home late and rush to the shower without even saying hi. I'd ignored it all. Told myself people drift, routines change, and as long as we still said I love you at night, everything was fine. But the thing is, she hadn't said those words in weeks. Maybe longer. The cruise ship was beautiful. Elegant dining rooms, live jazz under the stars, couples swaying on the dance floor. And me? I was just there. Floating, drinking, pretending I wasn't unraveling inside. I smiled at the servers, made polite conversation with an older couple from Kansas, even signed up for a snorkeling trip. But every minute felt like I was watching someone else's life. On the second night, I found her sun hat in my suitcase. Still had the tags on. I sat there holding it for what felt like an hour. That stupid, floppy sun hat. The one she told me she'd wear when we sipped cocktails by the pool. The truth hadn't hit me yet. Not completely. But the seed was planted. And something told me, deep in that quiet, stubborn part of my gut that always shows up a little late to the party, that this trip was going to answer questions I didn't even know I was asking. And I wasn't ready for the answers. Not yet. But they were coming. The second morning on the cruise started like the first, early wake-up, quiet breakfast, and a walk to the upper deck with a mug of bitter coffee that tasted like it had been brewed in a hurry. Isaac found himself settling into a familiar routine despite the unfamiliar setting. The sky was streaked with pinks and soft oranges, and the ocean stretched endlessly in every direction, gently rocking beneath the ship like a giant breathing animal. He found a shaded lounge chair tucked beneath one of the poolside cabanas and sat with his coffee, trying not to think too much. The ship had been kind to him so far, endless distractions, small talk with strangers, and enough activities to keep his mind half occupied. But no matter what he tried, the silence beside him was deafening. The absence of Brittany's voice, her laugh, her sarcastic quips, it haunted every corner of the ship. And then it happened. Just as he lifted his mug for another sip, movement caught his eye from the far end of the deck. A flash of familiar hair, a laugh he'd heard 1,000 times, and then, the swimsuit. Red and white stripes, modest but flattering. He had bought it for her last Christmas, wrapped in silver paper with a handwritten note she never mentioned afterward. She told him once it made her feel elegantly beachy. He remembered that word. Elegant. There she was. Brittany. Tanned, glowing, radiant in the morning sun as if she'd never cancelled on anything, as if she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Her head tilted back, sunglasses on, her smile wide and carefree. She wasn't sick, she wasn't working. She wasn't back home scrambling to meet deadlines. She was on this very ship, sipping something bright from a tall glass, and laughing like betrayal didn't have a face. Next to her, lounging in mirrored sunglasses and bright floral shorts, was Jason. The friend. The "you're being insecure" defense. The "how dare you even ask" name drop. The one who'd been showing up in too many conversations, too many photos, too many coincidences. Jason wasn't gay. Or if he was, it sure wasn't stopping him from resting his hand on her thigh in that very moment. Isaac ducked back behind the cabana wall before he could be seen, heart pounding like he'd just been dropped into a combat zone. His grip tightened around the coffee mug until the ceramic bit into his fingers. He crouched low and reached into his pocket, his phone already in his hand before the rage could catch up with the shock. He snapped a picture. Then another. Then a third, zoomed in just enough to catch the intimacy of their positioning, the unspoken language of comfort, of familiarity, of two people who had clearly done this before. He stared at the photos, stunned. His body felt distant, as though he were watching from outside himself. Adrenaline surged through him, then vanished, leaving him hollow and burning. The morning sun that had warmed his skin just moments ago now felt like fire ants crawling across his shoulders. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't bad timing or miscommunication or a misread situation. This was a lie. A deep, deliberate lie, crafted over weeks or months, maybe longer. She hadn't backed out of the trip because of work. She hadn't stayed behind at all. She was here, on the same damn boat, under the same sun, breathing the same sea air. And she'd made sure he wouldn't find out. At least, that was the plan. Isaac leaned back against the cool wall of the cabana, letting his head rest against the wood. His heart was still racing, but now there was something else behind it. Not confusion. Not even heartbreak. Clarity. She'd planned this. Every fake excuse, every carefully worded dismissal, every, "you go ahead without me, I'll catch up on work," line. It was all scripted. All designed to get him on this cruise alone while she had her version of a honeymoon 2 decks above his. He didn't know how she thought she'd get away with it. Maybe she assumed the ship was big enough. Maybe she never expected him to actually go through with the trip. Or maybe she just didn't care if he saw her anymore. That thought stung the most. Later that night, dressed in a black blazer and crisp white shirt, Isaac wandered into the ship's casino. It was bustling, flashing lights, digital chimes, the soft hum of wasted money and false hope. He wasn't there to gamble. He was there to breathe. To exist in a space not touched by memories of her. But the universe had a sense of humor. Because there she was again. Brittany stood by one of the roulette tables, a glass of champagne in one hand and the other looped around Jason's arm. She looked glamorous, glittering in the artificial lights, her smile perfect, the same one she'd used 1,000 times to disarm and distract. Jason was laughing, his posture relaxed and familiar. They looked like any other couple on vacation. Isaac didn't flinch. He didn't slow down, didn't shift his gaze, didn't offer her the satisfaction of a scene. He walked right past them, the same way one walks past mannequins in a department store, lifeless figures in designer clothing. The click of his shoes on the marble echoed louder than any confrontation could have. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw her freeze. Mid-laugh, mid-glance, her entire body went rigid like someone had cut the strings. Jason leaned in, clearly confused. But she wasn't listening to him. Her eyes locked on Isaac's back as he kept walking. He didn't give her anything. No words. No reaction. Not even a glance over the shoulder. Just the quiet knowledge that she'd been caught. That he knew. That he had the pictures. And that he wasn't going to lose his temper. That was the part that would terrify her the most. He made it all the way back to his cabin before his hands started to shake. Not from weakness, but from the effort it took to hold the storm back. The betrayal felt like sunburn under the skin, slow, creeping, invisible until it was too late. Until it cracked and bled. Isaac stood at the balcony, staring out at the open sea. It was still beautiful. But now it held secrets. And so did he. Isaac didn't say a word for the rest of the cruise. He became a ghost, present in body, absent in every other way. He ate at the buffet, lounged near the pool, even joined a trivia game one afternoon just to fill the space, but he didn't speak unless he had to, and when he did, it was short and clipped, a far cry from the man who had once planned this cruise with excitement and intention. He avoided the deck she favored, skipped the themed parties she'd likely be drawn to, and adjusted his schedule to always be 5 steps ahead, or behind, wherever Brittany and Jason were. They knew he'd seen them. There was no question. The morning after their casino encounter, he found the first text. Just a single sentence with no punctuation and far too much false innocence. Then came the calls. Then the note, handwritten on cruise stationery, folded and slipped under his cabin door like some secret past in class. She had the nerve to draw a little heart under her name. He didn't open it. He didn't need to. What could she possibly say that would make the image of her in that striped swimsuit vanish from his mind? The way she'd leaned into Jason like they'd done this 100 times before. The thought of her hand on someone else's shoulder, the same hand that used to rest on his chest at night, was a kind of betrayal he couldn't put into words. And now she wanted to talk. To explain. No. Not this time. She'd had her chance. Now it was his. He started with their finances. Ship Wi-Fi wasn't perfect, but it didn't have to be. Just stable enough to give him access to their joint accounts, and with a few security questions only he would know, his mother's hometown, their honeymoon destination, the name of their first dog, he was in. Within minutes, he downloaded everything. Every transaction. Every withdrawal. Every transfer that didn't make sense until now. It was all there, digital breadcrumbs of a life she thought she was hiding. Some dates lined up too perfectly. Spa appointments charged on weekends she claimed to be at open houses. Hotel bookings in cities she never mentioned. A new card he hadn't even known existed, listed under her maiden name. The more he scrolled, the colder he felt. This wasn't new. This wasn't impulsive. This had structure. And she'd counted on him never looking. He froze the joint savings account first. Locked it down with dual authorization only he could access. Then the credit cards, revoked her user access, changed the billing address, rerouted the alerts. Her shopping sprees were over. If she wanted to buy Jason another designer watch, she'd have to do it with her own money, not his. Then came the house. His late father, God rest him, had been a meticulous planner. When the old man passed, he left Isaac not just the home he'd grown up in, but a roadmap for how to protect it. Buried in the paperwork was a clause, a backdoor that allowed Isaac to transfer the deed into a private trust in his name alone, under specific conditions. One of them, infidelity proven or strongly suspected. Isaac didn't need a courtroom for that. Not when he had high-definition photos taken from behind a cabana curtain. The transfer took a few keystrokes and a signed PDF. Suddenly, the house no longer belonged to Mr. and Mrs. Palmer. It was his. Fully. Legally. And Brittany didn't even know she'd already lost it. Then he scheduled an emergency consultation with his lawyer back home. Paid for international access and set a video call for the following day. The reception glitched a bit, but the message got through loud and clear. Divorce proceedings were to be initiated immediately, citing irreconcilable differences, though the evidence folder titled Cheating Spouse Proof.zip would speak volumes if needed. By the time the other passengers were enjoying dinner under twinkle lights, Isaac had filed electronically. No drawn-out confrontations. No screaming matches. Just precision. Control. Clean detachment. There was something oddly therapeutic about doing it all from a lounge chair. He sipped a piña colada while canceling her spa membership, felt the breeze as he removed her access to his insurance benefits. Each tap on his tablet was a nail in the coffin of a marriage she'd buried long before he even realized it was dead. But the final twist was the one that changed everything. On a whim, or maybe instinct, he looked up a private investigator he'd seen mentioned in a veterans forum. The guy specialized in domestic surveillance and digital forensics. Isaac wasn't expecting much, just a general inquiry. He filled out the online form, uploaded a few of the photos he'd taken, and asked for a rush report. He got an answer faster than expected. Turns out, she was already on the investigator's radar. Not Brittany by name, but a woman matching her exact description had been flagged 3 months prior by a suspicious husband in a nearby suburb. Different man, same behavior. Multiple, solo trips, lots of unexplained charges, and a routine of staying just outside the traceable margins. The PI had even tracked her once, caught her entering a hotel with Jason. Same man. Different city. She was a pattern, not an accident. Isaac stared at the investigator's report long after the sun dipped below the horizon. His tablet dimmed and locked itself, but he just sat there, stunned, letting the weight of it all crush the last remnants of disbelief. This wasn't some whirlwind mistake. It wasn't an emotional lapse or a one-time betrayal fueled by distance or resentment. She had rehearsed this. Perfected it. Worn two lives like outfits, his wife in one, his absence in another. And she'd slipped between them so effortlessly, it made him question everything. Every anniversary. Every, "I miss you." Every quiet morning she kissed his cheek before heading off to work. The worst part? He wasn't even sure she regretted it. By now she must have realized the silence wasn't random. Her texts had turned from curious to desperate. She'd knocked on his cabin door once, maybe twice. But he never answered. He didn't need to. Because the damage was done. And the cleanup? That was already in motion. He was no longer mourning the end of his marriage. He was orchestrating its finale. And the script didn't include her side of the story anymore. She'd taken everything for granted. His trust. His time. His loyalty. But the one thing she didn't count on, the thing that would undo everything, was that Isaac Palmer wasn't the kind of man to unravel. He rebuilt. Quietly. Strategically. And by the time this cruise was over, Brittany would return to a world that no longer welcomed her. Because while she played pretend in the sun, he'd rewritten their ending. And this time, the truth was on his side. The ship pulled into port under a sky smeared with gray, overcast, humid, and heavy. It was the kind of weather that made everything feel more sluggish, more exposed. Passengers shuffled toward disembarkation with suitcases in tow, their post-vacation glow still clinging to sunburned skin. Isaac, however, moved with a different kind of purpose. There was no smile, no small talk with fellow travelers. He was the first off the ship, weaving through the crowd with the calm precision of someone who had already closed a chapter in his life before the final page had even turned. Behind him, somewhere in the crowd, Brittany was scrambling. She had seen the look in his eyes when he passed her in the casino. No rage, no questions, no confrontation, just cold distance. It was the kind of look that didn't need an explanation. It told her everything. And judging by the hurried footsteps echoing behind him as they cleared customs, she was realizing that silence wasn't the absence of conflict, it was the beginning of a reckoning. He didn't turn around. Let her chase. Let her cry. Let the excuses come spilling out like cheap wine at an open bar. None of it mattered. She'd had her stage, her spotlight, her illusion of control. That show was over. The Uber ride from the port to the house was quiet. Isaac stared out the window as the city rushed past, his thoughts running even faster. He had timed everything down to the hour. While Brittany and Jason had been poolside, sipping cocktails and sunbathing in their manufactured paradise, the gears back home were already grinding. His lawyer had pulled strings. The documents had gone through. The motion for the temporary restraining order had been approved. The locksmith had come and gone. The cameras were installed. The house, his house, was no longer a shared space. It was a fortress. She didn't know that yet. But she would. By the time he arrived, everything was in place. The lawn looked the same, but everything beyond the front door had changed. The doorbell camera caught him stepping onto the porch, and the familiar chime confirmed what he already knew: his world, now monitored, was firmly in his control. The front door opened smoothly with the new key. He stepped inside, taking in the quiet hum of the AC, the faint smell of fresh paint from the touch-ups he'd ordered while they were at sea. Brittany's perfume, once clinging to the walls like a ghost, was gone. She wasn't far behind. Not more than 30 minutes after he walked in, she arrived. Tires squealed in the driveway, and footsteps pounded up the porch. The jingle of her old keys filled the air, followed by the unmistakable rattle of failure. The lock didn't budge. Confusion. Then panic. Then pounding fists. A sheriff's notice flapped in the breeze, taped firmly to the glass window, "No trespassing. Court issued restraining order. Violation will result in immediate arrest." Beneath that, his lawyer had added a neat envelope addressed in her name. It held everything she needed to know. The filing. The official notice. The evidence of infidelity, financial misconduct, and marital deception, neatly documented. Not that she'd be surprised by the content, she just didn't expect to see it thrown back at her so fast. Or so thoroughly. Isaac watched the footage from inside. No sound, just video, Brittany's hands flailing, her face caught in a storm of disbelief and desperation. Her jaw worked through a flurry of words he couldn't hear, but he knew them by heart. She was trying to spin it. To paint herself as the victim. But there was no one on the porch to lie to this time. Just a camera, cold and unblinking. She tried calling again. And again. Isaac let it ring. The cherry on top. Her belongings were gone. Every last handbag, every framed print of an inspirational quote she never followed, every pair of designer heels and skincare serum, boxed up and delivered to her mother's porch, signed for, timestamped, and logged. He even included a spreadsheet of what was packed, just in case she tried to claim something sentimental was stolen. She hadn't even noticed her emails were bouncing yet. He'd cut access to the shared cloud drive. Deleted her profile from the smart home system. Changed the Netflix password, too, not out of pettiness, but because he knew she'd try to log in just to see if he'd cracked. He hadn't. As for Jason, his story unfolded in parallel chaos. Isaac hadn't planned on digging into the guy's personal life, but the private investigator had uncovered more than just vacation rendezvous and shared hotel rooms. Jason was married. To a man named Derek. High-end interior designer, very active on social media. Apparently, Jason's solo weekends weren't just with Brittany. There was a trail. Pictures. Flight records. Receipts. Derek had received an anonymous tip, courtesy of a VPN and a fake email account Isaac had created the night before disembarkation. The fallout was swift. Derek outed Jason on his Instagram story. Photos. Screenshots. One of Brittany at the pool. One of Jason's texts. The comments section lit up like wildfire. Jason's business page vanished within hours. Derek changed the locks, too. By the time Brittany was sitting in her car outside the home she no longer had legal access to, sobbing into a phone Isaac wasn't going to answer, her fantasy life had collapsed. Jason wasn't texting back. Her work email had been flagged for suspicious activity thanks to unauthorized use of joint funds. Her credit card declined when she tried to book a hotel. The world she tried so carefully to compartmentalize had turned on her in a single weekend. Isaac stood in his home now, and let the silence wash over him. He wasn't angry anymore. That phase had passed somewhere between the frozen assets and the digital signatures. Now he just felt clean. Like someone who had finally stepped out of a burning building and realized the fresh air still belonged to him. Everything Brittany had weaponized, trust, money, affection, had been turned back on her. And he hadn't needed to yell or beg or plead. Just silence. Action. Precision. Let her tell her side. Let her play victim to whoever would listen. He had the receipts. And Brittany? She had her suitcase in the trunk and nowhere left to go. The courtroom wasn't nearly as dramatic as Isaac had imagined. No gavel slams or gasps from the gallery. Just the dull hum of a ceiling vent, the soft shuffle of paperwork, and the quiet anticipation of lives about to be split in two. It was almost clinical, sterile walls, polished benches, and the faint scent of stale coffee. But beneath that sterile veneer, the room held tension thick enough to cut. Isaac sat at the plaintiff's table, calm, collected, and sharpened by months of deliberate silence. Beside him, his attorney leafed through neatly tabbed folders, the paper trail of betrayal. Across the aisle, Brittany looked like someone who had just learned the magic trick was over and the audience wasn't clapping. Her hair was pinned up, her outfit tailored, but her eyes darted too much. She smiled at the judge once, and it didn't land. The moment the proceedings began, Isaac let the evidence do the talking. There were no dramatic speeches, no bitter outbursts. Just facts, presented with surgical precision. Screenshots of texts, flirtatious, reckless, time-stamped. Hotel bookings made in cities he hadn't been told about. GPS data from her own phone, pulled from cloud backups she'd forgotten to disconnect. Bank transfers, marked under vague names, aligning perfectly with Jason's known haunts. And the kicker, photos from the cruise. Crystal clear. Her, in that red and white swimsuit. Jason's hand on her thigh. Sunlight, intimacy, and betrayal all captured in one frame. The court absorbed it in stunned silence. Brittany tried to push back. Her attorney spun a tired narrative, emotional distance, temporary confusion, the pressures of being a real estate agent married to a man who worked too much. But nothing landed. Every counterpoint was met with documentation. Every lie unraveled with timestamps, screenshots, or receipts. Even the restraining order, which Isaac had filed quietly upon return, was admitted as evidence of emotional harm and financial risk. The final blow came when her former employer submitted a statement to the court, effective immediately. Brittany was no longer affiliated with the firm. The reasoning was simple: her name had become toxic. Clients had caught wind of the scandal, and the company couldn't afford the reputation hit. In an industry built on appearances, hers had collapsed entirely. The judge's ruling was firm but fair. Isaac was awarded full ownership of the home, already transferred into a trust, but now court-affirmed. Custody of Cooper, their golden retriever, went to him without hesitation. Financial restitution was denied to Brittany, citing misuse of joint funds. The judge had even raised the possibility of future charges should evidence of fraud emerge. Isaac didn't smile. He didn't need to. He'd won the only thing he really came for, his peace. The months that followed moved slowly, but in the best way. There were long days filled with silence that didn't ache anymore. The house, once a battlefield of quiet tensions and sidelong glances, now felt like his again. He painted the guest room, boxed away the wedding photos without ceremony, and finally cleared out the junk drawer filled with old loyalty cards and receipts from restaurants where she used to pick fights. Cooper adjusted too. The dog, once constantly pacing and anxious, had settled into a calm routine: morning walks, midday naps in the sun, evening fetch on the lawn. Sometimes Isaac looked at the dog and wondered how much he'd picked up on. Animals always knew more than they let on. And then, one early spring morning, Isaac stood by a lake with a fishing rod in hand, a thermos of black coffee at his feet, and his brother beside him, laughing about something from high school. Their dad sat in a folding chair nearby, dozing lightly beneath a brimmed hat. The breeze was cool, the water glassy and still, and for the first time in years, Isaac felt weightless. He wasn't haunted by what-ifs or late-night questions. There were no more pit stops at memories that used to hurt. No rehearsing confrontations in his head, no reliving that moment on the cruise deck. What happened had happened. And what came after, that was his to build. He thought about Brittany now and then, not with bitterness, just as a reminder. A memory more than a scar. Word around town was she'd moved back in with her mother for a while. Jason had disappeared off social media entirely. Last anyone heard, he was somewhere in Arizona, trying to save face with a new set of lies. Isaac didn't care. He had a new routine. Simple. Quiet. Honest. Some days he worked late at the agency, picking up freelance projects on the side. Others, he let the day stretch long, reading on the porch, fixing up the old shed out back, teaching Cooper new tricks for the hell of it. His lawyer had once joked he could probably teach a master class in revenge. But Isaac hadn't done any of it out of malice. He'd just removed the parts of his life that no longer belonged. That was the thing about betrayal: it didn't always break you. Sometimes it clarified. Stripped everything down to the stud so you could rebuild it right. Silence, in the end, had been his greatest weapon. While she screamed into the void for attention, he moved behind the scenes, rearranging everything. Not out of anger. Out of resolve. No threats. No scenes. No shouting matches on the front lawn. Just control. Measured. Precise. Final. And as the sun rose higher over the water and his brother handed him a cold beer from the cooler, Isaac let out a laugh that surprised even him. Not because something was funny, but because it came so easily now. This wasn't the life he planned. It was better. Because this time, he built it with both eyes open. And he knew exactly who to keep out.